In conversation with Leslie Ullman. Leslie Ullman is the author of seven poetry collections, most recently Unruly Tree, University of New Mexico Press 2024, a collection whose poems take their titles from Brian Owner's Oblique Strategies. She also has published a hybrid collection of craft essays, writing exercises, and poems titled Library of Small Happiness, Tau Prex 2017. A chapbook titled Self-Portrait as Vanishing Art, a playful collection of self-portraits as mostly non-human phenomena, were published by Lily Press Review in 2025. Professor Emerita at University of Texas, El Paso, where she taught for 27 years, she remained a faculty member in the low residency MFA program at Baltimore College of the Fine Arts. Our award include the year series of Younger Poet Award, the Lower Poetry Prize, two NEA fellowships, and the New Mexico, Arizona Book Award for Poetry. She lives in Taos, New Mexico. Our website is www.leslieallman.com. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today Leslie Ullman and Cindy Breck co-hosting me in the conversation. Welcome on the show, Leslie. How are you doing today?
Fine, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Cindy.
This is going to be amazing, really. So lovely that we are here to sit down on a virtual round table to have a conversation around your bodies of amazing literature work. Thank you very much once again for joining on. So, listen, I need to first say that I am very impressed by your book, Unruly Tree, which sounds to me to be quite awesome, quite lovely, captivating, and beautiful. And I would like us to start today's conversation by asking you, of all things, really, what led you to writing this book? And of all genres of literature, why have you chosen poetry? If you can run us through the making of this book, that would be great.
Well, I was looking, a lot of your questions have to do with why I wanted to do this and how I did it. And I think one of the things I should say at the outset, which might cover some of the questions, I have discovered in recent years that I write better poems if I really don't know what I'm going to do when I sit down. So I have learned that anything that helps me take myself by surprise is going to lead me to a more viable poem and a much more enriching experience than if I try to write about something I've been thinking about. And I started doing this. Well, I think what helped me was writing a poem a day every August with two friends we're now going to do our 5th year. And when you have to do a poem a day or a draft a day, you're kind of desperate to come up with a subject. Writing the poem wasn't so much the problem as deciding what to write. So one year, I just would take the last line of a poem I'd written the day before and let that be either the title or the first line of the next one. And I found that it just catapulted me in new directions to have a given beginning or a given title. So once I discovered that, I had my antenna out to find out, well, how else can I do that? And right around the time I finished that book, taking my own lines, I went to a student lecture at Vermont College of the Fine Arts where I teach. And it was a lecture on lists. And she passed out this list of really weird phrases. I had never seen them before, and I'd never heard of Brian Eno, which, a lot of people thought I was not on this planet if I didn't know who he was. But they looked like rough translations from a foreign language. They were phrases that some of them made sense, and some of them did not. And then I loved them because I didn't understand them. And I decided I'm going to take this list home and I'm going to use each one as a title and see what happens. And along the way, I looked up Brian Eno and I looked up the oblique strategies and I found out who he was. And he and Peter Schmidt designed them. I guess Eno says that he was renting studio space for composing, and he would panic when he got in there because he was paying by the minute. He was paying a lot of money for this rented space. And then he'd just clutch because he needed to make the time work and he didn't know what to do. So he found these phrases. He started using these phrases, making them up to get himself out of linear thinking and get himself into lateral thinking and get himself to jolt himself into creating. And then Peter Schmidt, his artist friend, he found that Peter was doing the same thing. So they made this deck of cards in 1975 with all the oblique strategies that they both wrote. So in effect, I found myself using them very much the way he intended for artists to, to break yourself out of a rut, take yourself by surprise, and just get the energy moving. So I did all 110 of them. It took me about 4 years. And I just had so much fun with them. I didn't keep them all. I mean, some of, if you do that much, you have to write some duds and you have to give yourself permission to do that. And I've been at this long enough where I'm just fine with making a lot of mistakes. But I had a really good time. And in the process of dealing with his material and knowing a little bit about him, I found myself, when I went to concerts, I would watch the musicians' faces. I would watch the audience. I would notice the way they were adjusting their music stands. I was noticing things that were along with the music because these strategies were making me sensitive to what goes on in concerts. And I found myself writing about music. I found myself writing about art. Some of the prompts led me completely into non-art related things. I ended up with a lot of very different things. But I think for the most part, the book is dealing with process and with aspects of all the arts, writing, music, painting. And to give a united theme, it's really about making. It's really about making things. And I was in the midst of making by making the poems, but I was using that to, in many cases, write about making. So I'd say it's about process, which the more and more I do this, the more I think process is where it's at, more important than product.
That's interesting that you say that. It's something that caught me by surprise. You said that the theme is about making and then also about process. And now I would assume that this is in the unruly tree. And so my question is, do you have other themes, because you're writing poetry, do you have other themes related to your book? And also, do you have any subject lines that you would like to share?
Absolutely. When you have these prompts, you just go where they take you. I would sit in front of the screen with the prompt, and I would sit in front of a white screen and just wait for something to happen. And as soon as something came out, it helped me feel my way into the next thing and into the next thing and the next thing. So yes, I write about music and art. I wrote one about skiing. There's one of the prompts is, what mistakes did you make last time? And I made a list of all the mistakes I could remember that were funny and that I was willing to share. And in one of them, I went to, when my mom was in her 90s, we went to a concert together at Symphony Hall in Chicago, and I found myself writing about all the elderly people who were going to this concert and what might their lives have been like and what brought them here and how much effort did it take for them to get here because they were all, very elderly. So, I mean, these prompts took me in a whole lot of different directions. Which I loved, because if I were just writing about the arts and just writing about making, it would have been white noise. I think one of the hardest things I had to do in making this book was figure out how to arrange it, because each poem was like a tile in a mosaic. And I felt like I had a mosaic of many different tiles and colors, and I had to find a way to make them talk to each other. But I wanted the variation. So, I'm just thinking, I realize I didn't adequately answer a couple of things you asked. One of the prompts is, you are an engineer. And so I found myself thinking about engineering terms and pulleys and levers and how things balance. So that wasn't about music or writing or process or autobiographical stuff. That was just, you are an engineer. And I found myself playing with engineering themes. And I found myself making the poem wander all over the page rather than just go straight down. So some of these poems wanted to use space differently.
Mm.
I
Wow.
wrote one poem about Michael Wolff. I mean, I didn't think I was going to write about him, but one of the prompts made me think about him. And he's a jazz pianist who can play two keyboards at once, one in front of him and one behind him. And
Wow.
he has kind of a nerve disease that makes him very hyper.
Mm.
And I was wondering if that helps him do that. And the poem was full of dashes. It was full of interruptions. So what I'm saying is each prompt led me into something that not only was a subject, but also sometimes a form, the way it was laid out on the page.
Mm.
And I was just kind of letting my intuition take over and not worry too much about screwing up. Because if I
Wow.
had, I wouldn't have had the freedom to make all those different things happen. So then when I was putting it together, I really couldn't figure out how to make it work because I didn't want the poems to clash with each other or cancel each other out. And I ended up dividing the book into three parts. And I kind of wanted to keep music in there, but not too much. So part one is floating time. And maybe that has to do with more meditative things. And then left hand time was some of the more jarring uh, experimental poems.
Mhm.
And then backbeat time. So I was thinking about, I guess I was thinking of sensations, floating, left hand, back and backbeat. And I just tried to intuit which poems wanted to go in each section.
Yeah.
It's really hard to paraphrase this because it's more of how you feel the poems rather than what they're
Yeah.
about.
When
Yeah.
you started talking about the dashes and then the words wanting to go off a different direction, um, you're I write novels, you write poetry. That could be the same way for us when we decide, oh, we want one sentence here because it's got to add that impact because it's emotionally driven sentence. And I also look at it's kind of like the voice of the author,
Mm.
you as the author of your poetry and stuff like that. That's kind of like a unique formula that you're coming up with because I don't read poetry a lot. That's why I had to ask Peter, like, how would I go with that subject line here? But with that said, mood. Mood generates so much
Yes.
when you talk about a prompt
Absolutely.
and stuff like that. And when you say that you sit there and you stare at the screen,
That was
it's like
funny.
no, well, I know I know a friend of mine, she uses prompts to really stir her creative imagination. I mean, I close down and shut down mentally and then try to create a scene in my head and then use that as my prompt. So everybody has their own method of madness or whatever you want to say it is. But okay, Peter, you're laughing. But I like how you're not like a linear poetry writer. You
Mm.
write with, it sounds like the passion, and you allow your inner heart to take you through your poetry, your words, and the dashes like you were talking about, and the movement to the words off to the side and then coming back to the left and different. And that's kind of interesting. That's
Well,
definitely
I think
interesting.
what helps, um, once I get something on the page, and sometimes I have learned, I mean, I'm not a young person. And so it's taken me a really long time to understand
Mm.
how to be still. I
Absolutely.
had no ability to be still. I was,
Mm.
get it done, do it. You can do this. So I have learned how to wait. Once I get a line, the first gesture on the page, it will lead me slowly into the next one. So I start
Mm.
listening to my own. First, I'm listening to the prompt. Then I'm listening to what I've just written. And that leads me into something else. And then that leads me into something else. So start having a dialogue with what I've said. That helps me. As I'm
Mm.
going through this, and this is what may relate me more to what you do, Cindy, is that as I start to see what the poem wants to be about, I start feeling a bigger picture, like a landscape.
Mhm.
I'll often I have one poem about go slowly all the way around the outside. I think that was the prompt. And I found myself remembering what it was like, writing about what it was like to be a kid hiding in the bushes at night for hide and seek, and how the freedom of being there at night by myself, all
Mm,
hidden. And I felt the whole scene. I didn't write the whole scene, but I was living in the whole scene
mm,
as I drafted the poem and then as I revised it. And here I'd better say that revision is a huge part of what I do.
Oh yeah.
absolutely.
I'll get a poem, I'll get a draft where I finally feel what the poem wants to do. That doesn't mean it's
Mm,
doing it yet, but at least I'm in there in a different way, having drafted it. So then I revise it, and by then I have the whole atmosphere of the poem. I have the scene of the poem. It may be a physical scene, it may be more of an idea-based scene or a
mm,
mental scene or whatever, but I have a big picture back there, and I'm trying to just pick little bits of it and refine them. And so I do that when I revise, and then I show the work to other people, and
mm.
to people I respect, and I let their feedback help me. So
Wow.
I don't want to be misunderstood by saying, oh, I sit down with these prompts and I sit and wait and I write something and I write something else and I get the poem. And no,
Mm,
it takes a long time. But the joy of it happens very fast and it stays
Hmm.
with me. That kicks in. And when you talk about a scene, I think as I draft, I start to have a scene of some
Hmm.
sort, whether it's
mm.
a mental meditative scene or a more physical one. That is definitely in the back of my mind.
Mm,
Hmm.
wow, that's an amazing answer you've got there. And I am so impressed and taken aback with these lovely answers we've got to these beautiful questions, really. And I love your take so much on all of this. I love your take particularly on revision because I think it's very important, even as a poet, because sometimes when you go back to a poem, and you wanted to revise it, you end up adding some little spice to it, wanted to change some word to make it sound more poetic in nature. And it's so beautiful. I think it's an amazing thing to do, really. And I wanted us to go much further. The poems in Unruly Tree are all inspired by Brian Eno and Peter Smith. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Schmidt.
Absolutely, they're oblique strategies. Now, I wanted to ask you, what drew you to that particular creative tool, and how did it feel to let someone else phrase something unexpected or random lead the direction of a poem? Tell us.
Well, that goes back to my discovery that I could keep myself writing more by letting prompts get me going. Um, and if I wanted to have a project that would keep me writing. So when I encountered these oblique strategies in listening to my students lecture, I thought, well, these are great because I don't understand them. And that, for me, is the most fertile territory
Wow.
for jump-starting some writing. And originally I thought, I don't know if I'm going to get a book out of these. I just want to play with them. I
Hmm.
want the calisthenics of dealing with them.
Hmm.
And so for me, because I didn't understand them, I knew that was going to work best for me. And that
Hmm.
some part of me was going to work my way through and find a way to be in dialogue with each one. And what was lucky was that the first couple I wrote, I was very pleased with them. And I showed
Hmm.
them just to some friends and they liked them. And I thought, well, maybe I will have a book out of this. So then I went ahead and did them all. And I wrote some pretty bad ones. They weren't all great. But what drew me to the oblique strategies was the fact that I didn't understand them, but that they all had a little bit of life. They had some mischief, and they had some mischief in them. And so it made me feel really comfortable about, I thought, well, I get to play with these and I don't have to impress anybody.
Hmm.
I get to just do this. And, I don't know if you all have seen the Brian Eno documentary.
Hmm.
I did not, I actually had one little email exchange with him. I wish it had kept going, but I wanted him to know what I was doing. And a friend of a friend of a friend of his, I got an email address and he was pleased. He wrote me a nice little email and I just didn't want to do this without letting him know. But I also, as you know, acknowledge him in the book. But anyway, when I saw the documentary about him this year, I loved the spirit of this man. He's so generous and so curious and so playful that all the qualities I had kind of unconsciously sensed coming from the oblique strategies, I saw this in him, in the little bits of interview with him. And he's just a wonderful soul. And I was so glad that I had engaged with him because I liked him so much. And, he's gotten along in years now, but he's still very young in spirit.
Wow.
Okay, you've really talked about emotion in so many different directions, your themes and stuff. I'd like to talk about something else. And you talked in a crafted essay about how intuition and sensory detail shaped your poems. Could you share with P English literature if there was any in the unruly tree, especially if there was external prompt of the cards?
Well, I think I've always loved what the image can do in our minds. When I first started reading poetry on my own and loving it, reading poets that were writing in the kind of English I spoke, as opposed to more traditional poets, I was so taken with images. It seemed that someone who could get an image down on paper that resonated and felt really right was in a way validating their existence. Like, I was here. I witnessed the world this way, and this is what I saw. And this is kind of hard to explain, but I just loved that images could both, it could do two things. It could make me admire that this person was so alive to even have this perception. But I also found that the images in poems were helping me meditate alongside the writer. And they were giving me my own daydream. They were getting me into my own consciousness in ways that I had never experienced before. So I learned early on that images were the magic thing, and that an image could do a lot. It could generate so much. So as a writer and as a teacher, I've often felt that, and there are writers who wouldn't say this. They might say sound is their music is their first thing. For me, I think it's the image, and when I've taught poetry, I've also tried to help students see that an image is like a stone thrown in clear water, still water, and it makes these concentric circles of ripples. And that's the magic of an image, that you get that reverberation. And then in a well-made poem, you're going to get image, 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 and their concentric circles kind of intersect, which is not a logical thing, but it's intuitively something, associatively something that people can feel. And they can feel that they harmonize, that they don't contradict each other. Each image has its moment, but they also work in dialogue together. But it's a dialogue that can't be paraphrased. It can only be felt. So that may be where the intuition comes in. So when I write, I want my images to do that. When I read for other people's images, and I take them in and I daydream with them, and I'm nourished by them.
Wow.
For me, music, it counts, but I think in my case, I'm not trying for music, but when I'm reading a poem of mine and revising it, I can hear the wrong notes. I can hear where something feels off. I can feel there's too many syllables, or the accent, it just doesn't feel right. So I try to change it until it feels right. And I think unconsciously, maybe that's where I'm making more music, by getting rid of the dissonance. But the image is what I'm thinking about first, because I love them so much. I love the material world. I love what my senses give me. I love what our senses give us.
Wow. That's
Thank you very much for sharing that.
I hope that answers the question.
I
Questions are hard.
You know what? And they're difficult, but at the same time, at least
interesting.
it's not the They're heartfelt questions and they're different questions. And so it draws out so much more than just what was your inspiration. It dives
Yeah, I
deeper. And
mean,
that's what we want. We want to get at the heart of what
absolutely.
exactly. English literature wants to bring out the best and get at the heart of where your passion comes from and how
Mm.
you do it, how you succeed, how you thrive. And I think that's what these questions target.
Yeah, and one of
So
the things, and one of the
Yeah, you
feedback
make
I've
us
gotten.
desperate, so we have to bail ourselves out.
oh,
I love it. I
Leslie, I
love it.
love
I
your
love it.
thinking.
I
I
think
love your
that's great.
thinking.
The
So hey,
desperate
we got to
as
work.
the desperate aspect got me laughing so hard. And one of the feedbacks I've got so far is like, I love the questions. You don't ask like the normal, usual questions like other shows would naturally ask of. You don't ask shallow, and I myself, I don't love shallow questions. I love to go deep into like we're digging something. We want to dig out the gold. We want to bring out something. We want to
Yeah.
bring out the diamond in the book. If you're finding something in a spot you know that, oh, there's a gold somewhere in this ground and you're digging it, you want to dig out the gold. We don't just want to stay
Right.
on the shallow
Yeah.
part, we want to go deep. One of the things I've got so far is like, your questions are so amazing. How did you come up with there? You've asked
Yeah.
really interesting
Well,
questions.
one of the things about poetry I've found, the worst thing you can do, and the most useless thing is to try to paraphrase it or talk about what it means or talk about what the author wanted. Um, and what you can talk about what a poem feels like. You can talk
Mm,
about what it makes you think about. You can talk about what kind of experience it's making you have. But
yeah.
that's not the same as, walking around as a subject or
Mm,
as a one or two dimensional thing, because there's so much about poetry that can only be felt and
absolutely.
can't really be talked about. And the challenge is to find words to capture what can't be really captured in words, but to try to walk around it in a way so that it can be made accessible in some form.
Beautiful and quite amazing and quite awesome. And I want us to, there's this question that popped up in my head, quite different from the ones we've had outlined already. And I think we had a conversation initially when we first jumped on the call, is about the level of recognition that your works have got so far. You've won awards, including Yale Series of Young Poet Award, the Lowell Poetry Prize, the NEA Fellowship, two NEA Fellowship, which I find to be quite amazing and quite awesome, really. And the New Mexico Arizona Book Award for poetry. I wanted to ask you, how does winning all of these awards, how does it make you feel as a poet? I mean, and if does it also influence the making of your future works in any way? I would love your answer to that.
The poetry world is so different now than it was. It's so much bigger and more diverse. And
Mm.
I've been at this a long time. Most of those awards were earlier career awards.
Oh.
So they have rolled completely off my back by now. They're just not on my radar screen. And they're not on anybody else's except yours right now. So that I feel I'm very grateful that I have had books published, that I have writer friends, that writing brought me into a career that I never thought I would love the way I have. And I
Mm.
feel super lucky. I also feel somewhat invisible, partly as an older writer, and partly just because there's so much out there and there's all these new young writers coming up, new energy. Spoken word has now found its way into literary work. And, it's all wonderful and it should happen. And these new energetic voices should be coming up. And
Absolutely.
I don't feel terribly visible. Sometimes I mind it, and most of the time I don't. I have my writing community. I have access to students. I can do freelance work with people. I can still function doing all the things that my writing makes me enjoy doing. But
Mm.
this is more being related questions and process related questions. In terms of more public things, on paper, I look more visible than I feel I am. And I think I'm probably speaking for a lot of writers a lot of
Mhm.
poets anyway. Um, and I think that's okay. I think that is the normal course of things. I'm just grateful that I get to still keep doing the things I'm doing. I wouldn't
Mhm.
mind having more attention. I wouldn't mind that. And I love to give readings and I would love to give more of them. But I'm not eating my heart out.
Yeah.
And I think I'm speaking for a lot of other writers when I
Mhm.
say all these things.
Mm.
You've talked about readings and stuff like that, and I'd like to take you to another side. What about reviews? I'm thinking about, if you're an author who focuses on the reviews that you've gotten from your poetry or not, and if you are an author that reads that poetry, how do you feel when you might have read a review that might have been misinterpreted? And how would you look at it differently?
I think most reviewers, and I've done some reviewing too, most reviewers don't really engage with books they don't like. I do not want to put all that time into writing a review of something that I don't enjoy being with.
Mhm.
So I think that, first of all, I'm not sure how much influence reviews have anymore, but I have gotten, um, I remember getting one that was clearly somebody had an agenda that was making them misread the book. And it was hurtful, but I also felt like I couldn't really learn anything from it because the reviewer, I think it was a little Amazon review, and it was very negative. And I felt like this reviewer was projecting, I think it was probably by a man. I'm almost sure it was. And I felt the reviewer was projecting something on the book that had nothing to do with it. And there was nothing I could do with that except ignore it. I may have gotten another one years ago that was more thoughtful and not terribly complimentary. And I thought I could learn something from it. Um, I haven't had either experience like either of those for many, many, many years. And in fact, I don't think I had many reviews until recently when I hired a very good publicist to just help me with this latest book. And I was telling Cindy about this. I don't necessarily recommend doing this, but if you know of somebody who you know is good and you know people who've worked with them
Yeah.
and they've had some success, that happened to me. And this woman has gotten me 5 or 6 reviews that are very thoughtful and they're lovely. And she's helping these people publish them. But I'm not sure that that's going to make any difference. And there's so much information
Yeah.
out there. When I started writing, there were, literary magazines, and it was a smaller community, and you knew where to go to read reviews, and you knew who was writing, and you knew who you wanted to follow. There are tons of things online, print, blogs. I can't read them all, and so I'm kind of assuming other people can't either.
Yeah.
So these reviews are lovely and they were thoughtful. They're the kind of reviews I wanted to write. But at least they're not putting me in that position of feeling misunderstood, which
Yeah.
was an older experience. But they're
Beautiful.
out there and we'll see. Maybe other people are better at keeping up
I
than I am.
appreciate your response to my question.
Yeah. That's an amazing one. Yeah, and also I would like to ask you, yeah, looking back at your first collection, Natural Histories, do you still recognize the poet you were then? Or does it feel like someone entirely different that you don't even know?
You know, that is so interesting. I think I recognized the person I was when I wrote the poems, because
Mm,
when I'm writing a poem, it just the poem imprints itself on my memory and my psyche so much. But what is different, where I don't recognize the very careful, fearful person I was when I wrote that first book. I mean, I was trying so hard to not show my weaknesses.
wow.
I was trying so hard not to do anything that women get criticized for. I was really being careful. And each poem just took ages to write.
Mm,
And I am not a person like that anymore. I am so the part I mean, I recognize who she was, but I don't link up with that very careful person. I'm
Mm.
much more, I'm willing to make mistakes. I'm more willing to entertain risky ideas, and I'm more willing to experiment. And I am no longer as afraid of being criticized
Mm.
as I was. I'm always afraid of being rejected. That's never fun. But I also realize that if I can't feel completely in myself and accepting of myself when I'm doing my work,
Mm.
that's the wrong point of departure. If nothing else, I've got to be there, and I've got to not please myself like, oh, this is a good poem, but
Mm.
I've got to do something that is fun and meaningful for me and not
Mm.
worry about the consequences.
Mm.
So my whole process of writing has changed.
Wow.
And I am not the careful, fearful person I was when I wrote my first book.
You're definitely on a journey and you've progressed.
Yeah, as I would hope we all are.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think when you do this stuff for a long time, I think you learn to get out of your way.
Yeah.
And I think it takes many years to get out of your way. And I think in the beginning, maybe I had to be the person I was.
Mm-hmm.
I had to be that careful. I had to be maybe more ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
All those things you have to have those things.
Mm.
And then you have to let them morph.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think my level of the kind of ambition I have has changed too. It's maybe reduced. I want to be in harmony with myself.
And I think that's one of the most important goals in life is to be in harmony with yourself, spiritually, emotionally, in every aspect, and especially with what you put on paper. I think that is very important. Um, you've been a writer, a teacher. In essence, you live inside your poetry. I mean, I could hear that when you talk. If you had to describe what poetry means to you at this point in your journey, in your life, how would you put it into words?
I think engaging with poetry, um, I think you can tell when you're doing something that fills you with energy and makes you feel grounded in
Mm.
yourself.
Mm. Mm.
You know that you're doing something that your soul wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I have that with writing. It started with reading. I have that when I write. If, just working on a poem makes me get up from the desk and feel okay about the rest of the day, whatever else I'm doing. It adds a little bit of pleasure. I
Mm-hmm.
have this skiing. My body wants to do it, even if I'm not feeling well. If I can feel well enough to go out there, I know that my soul is going to say, yes, we should be here. So yeah, I think part of it is you just, you start to recognize, and I think there's a lot of other things that can make us feel like that.
Yeah.
It could be certain kinds of interchanges with people. It could be doing something with crafts.
Mm.
It could be
Mm-hmm.
cooking. So there's a lot of things that will do that for us, even when we have a main thing like I have for writing.
It feeds your soul.
But for me, just and I'm a pretty athletic person, so I need to run or bike every day, and I feel like that's part of what keeps me together. Well,
Mm-hmm.
writing is sort of like my workout, my big workout, my most essential workout is just being with language and pushing myself to a new place and exercising my craft. And when I've been doing that for a couple of hours, I just feel more in my body and in
Mm-hmm.
my life.
Mm. Oh,
That's a
wow.
beautiful response. I love it. Thank you.
That's an amazing one. I could feel the depth of that, and I can relate to it by snapping my finger to those lovely, beautiful, thought-provoking, and quite profound answers you've given to that. And I know we are quite running out of time because we have like 4 or 5 minutes left to go. But then I wanted to ask you, apart from the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on? And also, where can interested viewers get your books from?
Um, I'll tell you that, but you did ask one question that I'm hoping I get to play with, just that you didn't ask me, but you wrote it to me.
The balance.
I'm just working on poem by poem right now. I don't have any prompts. I don't have a sequence in mind. And I'm just giving myself a chance. And I've published 3 books in the last year and a half. They weren't all written together, but they just happened to come out. And it's like, I don't have to be in a hurry to publish another book. Let me just feel my way and write new pieces one at a time. And I put all the revised ones together, and I don't see that they will all be keepers, but I'm not in a hurry. I'm just happy to just be playing. I'm playing with some looser forms, some more loosely associated poems. And so I'm enjoying doing that. As for where my books can be found, I think bookshop.org is one good place. The publishers are a good place. Amazon is not my favorite place right now, but I do still buy my books there because I live in Taos and I just don't live near too many bookstores, so I use them. So they're not hard to find. I think I just want to say how I want people to read poems. I know that I did not like reading poetry when I was in college and had to take tests on poetry. But as soon as I just found it on my own and started reading on my own, it just blossomed for me. So when I became a teacher, I wanted to let students have that experience. And I think the mistake people often make in reading poetry is they're trying to understand it at the outset. They feel like if they can't get it at one reading, then it's just beyond them. And I learned early on that to tell people you should read poems, and when you see, as you find a passage that you like, you might just want to ask yourself, what in my own life might have made me say this in this way?
Oh, wow.
Is there something about my own experience that this image reminds me of? And so I really feel that readers should bring their own selves into their reading and say, well, what in my experience links up with what's going on in here? And just feel that. And then the trick is, yes, you want to bring yourself in. You are in dialogue with this writer, but then you don't want your dialogue with the writer to make you totally misread what they're saying. You don't have to know exactly what they're saying and you can't know why they wrote the poem, but you want to bring your personal experience in. That's how you're going to share the experience of the poem. And then when in a teaching situation, I say, okay, you guys can do this, but you want to make sure that you're not misreading the poem at the same time. So you want to find a balance. And I found that really important. And it's something that nobody ever said to me. And I don't think I've heard many people say it. So I wanted to say that because I think probably people would understand it the minute they hear it.
Right. I understand what you're saying there. And I'm not a poetry girl. What I get is when I was in creative writing and we were talking about different aspects, and my instructor would bring up poetry, they would ask, what do you think the author's trying to convey here? But it should have focused more on the emotions and stuff like you're talking.
I always say, what kind of experience is this poem giving you?
Right. I could see that.
That's an amazing one, really. I love the conversation around that, getting engrossed in the poem. And I must say that, poetry is a genre that it's meant to be read quite differently. You don't read poem the same way you read a novel. Poems to me, as a poet, poems to me is the type that you have to read quietly, gently, with your attention. Sometimes when I feel tired, maybe I've had a long day, I went to work, I came back in the evening, I cannot pick a book and read at that point because I need total concentration. And poetry is the one you read in such scenarios with extreme carefulness. It's not meant to be rushed, so you can understand the right intention.
It's like a meditation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, when I read poems out loud, they're not meditations because the audience doesn't have time to do that. They don't have time to meditate next to me. So I have to read them as though they're a conversation.
Absolutely.
And I often have to read them without the line breaks that I'm using, without the pauses that might be good for a meditative flow. I have to think of them. No, I need these people to be able to relate right now. So now it's a conversation. But when I write them, they're a meditation for sure. And on the page, they're a meditation.
Absolutely. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Leslie Ullman's books directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also on other platforms.
Oh.
I also left link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Leslie, for coming on to talk with us around your amazing body of literature work. And also, this is more than awesome, very great, quite exciting, educative, inspiring, and we're all great. And I must say thank you very much once again for coming on.
Thank you. I enjoyed meeting both of you, and I would love to find out more about your work sometime.
Well, thank you.